Hello. So for this online module, we're going to be looking at how the social world impacts our schools and our classrooms. Our main objective is looking at how that idea of the context of our world affects how our students grow and develop, how they learn, as well as what they're being taught. So just to think about some things in your social world, cell phones. Think about how cell phones have impacted classrooms and learning, how teachers are trying to incorporate them, as well as how they might be disruptions. Also think about what's happening currently with COVID and how that is dramatically affecting what we're teaching our students in terms of safety and hygiene and how they're being taught. So those are just some examples similar to what we'll be drawing from for Chapter 4. We will be starting with how social context, things in our social world, impact our students' development. So I thought I'd start with a question. Do you think teachers should only care about their students' mental growth? What they're learning, how they're doing in math, how they're doing in history, and so on? Well, actually, no. Teachers need to be concerned with the whole student. We call this the whole child approach. That not only do you care about how they're doing academically and what they're learning, but you need to care about their physical growth, social and emotional, to think about the whole picture to truly teach your students well. So how are they doing with their home life and their relationships, and do they feel comfortable and safe in your classroom? So when we look at social context that impacts development, you can see there at the bottom all the different areas we're going to be looking at. And we're going to be starting with physical and emotional safety. So in the realm of physical and emotional safety, your students have to be safe. They have to feel secure in your classroom or they're not going to be able to learn. They're going to be too focused on the fact that they're uncomfortable or they don't feel secure. And teachers really need to be advocates for their students' safety, both in the classroom and out of the classroom. And I think we're seeing a lot of this right now with COVID, with teachers worrying about how can I make sure that my students feel safe? But one big area of thinking about students' physical safety is maltreatment of children, more specifically child abuse and neglect. So child abuse is a deliberate and intentional abusive act. Neglect is either withholding something that the child needs or failing to provide for them, failing to protect them. Now, obviously, we hope we don't see much of that in schools or in the classrooms, but this could be going on in their homes and could obviously impact them in the classroom. Here's an example that I drew from Facebook from my hometown where I'm at right now. 3 moms recently convicted of selling their kids into sexual trafficking in order to earn money for drugs. This is a horribly sad story, but it is something that does happen. I thought I'd put this question out for you. What age group do you think is the highest risk for being a victim of child maltreatment? Who do you think it is? Well, if you thought ages 3 and under, you're correct. It is our infants and our toddlers that are most likely to be victimized, and that is incredibly sad. So what you may or may not know is that teachers are what we call mandatory reporters, meaning if you suspect that one of your students is being harmed or neglected in any way, in the classroom, out of the classroom, at home, on the weekends, it is your legal duty to report. And you have to report within 48 hours that you suspect something. You don't even have to have hard evidence. You just have to say you suspect that there's something going on, that this child might be in danger. And so I thought I'd put this up from the OAE, the idea of what they say in regards to our duty to report to child services. And your schools might even have their own specific way of requiring that mandatory reporting. Teachers need to be aware of warning signs. So what are you going to look for? How might you suspect whether or not maltreatment is going on? I thought I'd include this. So this was recently posted on Facebook. The idea that since children have been home since March of 2020 due to the COVID virus, the number of reports of abuse and neglect have dramatically dropped. This is partially due to the fact that these kids aren't in school. So they're not in school. They don't have that third-party teacher school to possibly report potential dangers, and they're spending more time at home where the abuse might be going on. So teachers do play a very important role in stopping the cycle of abuse and neglect. So warning signs. Students who come to school and they're always hungry. That could be a sign of neglect, that they're not being fed. You see bruises on them. Now, kids get bruises. They fall down. They get bumps and scrapes. But do they have bruises in unusual places, other than their kneecaps, perhaps? Do they seem sad and depressed? Here's another example of a man who was arrested for alleged child abuse simply because the teacher noticed. The teacher noticed that, you know what, this little girl had visible bruising on her hands and on her legs, and she suspected something, and she might have stopped this little girl from being in even more danger. Okay, another thing to look for, kids who are always at school early, who always stay late. That is a sign, sometimes, of a kid that doesn't want to be at home, or parents that don't want them at home. So they're getting them there and keeping them there as long as they can. And students who are consistently absent. Chronic absenteeism is either an indicator of poor health or an indicator of perhaps some sort of maltreatment or neglect. All right, so another topic under the realm of physical and emotional safety is bullying. If you're not sure what bullying is, I thought I would define it for you. So an abusive behavior that is repetitive, so not just a one-time thing. It has to be somewhat recurring. It is deliberate and intentional. And it usually involves some sort of a power imbalance. Now, that power could be male to female. That could be an older to a younger child, a more popular to a less popular child, that there's some sort of perceived imbalance of power or actual physical strength. There is a difference in how males and females tend to bully. Females do it more social bullying, rumors, calling names, leaving people out. Males are more likely to engage in actual physical bullying, pushing, hitting, shoving, and so on. So you will commonly see a gender difference there. Who is most likely to be a victim of bullying? Well, actually, there are a lot of possibilities here. In general, it tends to be someone that the bully feels like is a safe target. Someone who's not going to retaliate, someone who's not bigger or stronger or more confident than them. So the way that might manifest is a minimalized social group. So it could be an underrepresented ethnic or religious group. So perhaps you have a small number of ethnic minorities, and maybe that's who gets bullied. Perhaps you have a couple of students in your school who are of a religious group that stand out in some way. Here's an example. This is an Ohio teenager. She was picked on and bullied because she was a Chinese American, and she tended to dress in country clothes and cowboy boots, and some of the students in the class made fun of her until she eventually took her own life. Also, LGBTQ students, or students who might just in some way look or dress differently than others. Students who are obese or have some sort of physical or learning disability, some way that they're going to stand out and it makes them easy to be picked on. I wanted to include this. So James Corden recently put something out on his show talking about fat shaming and how fat shaming is really similar to and the same thing as bullying. So it is something that you might not think about, that obese children are more likely to get picked on and bullied. And then finally, girls. Girls are more likely to be a victim of bullying than boys are. They do fit that category of someone who's more of a safe target and less likely to retaliate. So I think this leads to the inevitable question of what can we do? Now, we can't answer that here comprehensively. In your future classes at OU, we will be talking about this. But for today, just some little things you can do. Have a school-wide plan. The school must have an overarching plan on how to prevent bullying, how to handle bullying, what they define it as, and a program to work with students. Here, this is in Ohio. They created a district-wide anonymous reporting app. So students have an app on their phone where they can report bullying in a safe and confidential manner. Here's another school in Lima, Ohio, where they bring in guest speakers and they really try to address the bullying issue head on. So what else can be done? Well, let me move my slide forward here. Okay. Teachers and school staff need to actively monitor for bullying. Constantly keep an eye out on the playground. Observe your students. Keep an ear out. Look in the hallway. You need to be observant and look for it. You need to have consistent application of the rules when it comes to anti-bullying. That everyone gets the same treatment and that you're being fair in how you apply those rules. And try to teach awareness. Teach kids what is bullying so they know how to identify it, especially the precursors to bullying, and focus on kindness, how your students need to be kind to one another. There are a lot of books out there you can read to both younger and older students to help them understand what bullying is and ways to stop and prevent and react to it. I've got a short video to play that focuses on just a real simple strategy just to put the idea in your mind of how to reinforce kindness.
Pom-pom jar is a positive reinforcement strategy that promotes kindness. Whenever they help someone, they can put a pom-pom in the jar.
Eric, I see you put a pom-pom in the jar. What did you do?
I helped Kaichi to spell some words.
So first you get your materials and then you give some example of what's kindness. You can say nice words to someone, share pencil, eraser, or pass out papers. Each time a student put a pom-pom in the jar, we will say what the kid did.
I helped Damon put her garbage in the garbage can.
When the pom-pom jar gets full, we will have our classroom party. So once I introduce this activity, kids are more peaceful. I don't see that much argument. The kids help each other.
So, what a great and simple way to try to reinforce kindness. All right, under the category of physical and emotional safety, we have another one to look at, and that is gangs. And if you grew up in a rural area, it may not be something that you think about in terms of how it might touch your school-age students. But if you plan on teaching in an urban school and even a suburban school, gangs are something you're going to need to consider. Here's some information I found last night. I just wanted to show you some examples in Ohio that, for instance, here's a map of Toledo showing where the various gangs are considered to be located. And on the right, we see a couple of years ago, we see in Columbus how 19 members of the Crips gang were charged. There are actually 3 main gangs in Columbus, the Bloods, the Crips, and the... goodness, I've forgotten the name of the third. But it is something you need to consider and how that might impact your students. One of the ways it can impact the schools, and that's what this chapter is all about, how our social world impacts our schools, is dress code. You might find if you observe in certain urban and suburban schools in Ohio, there might be certain colors you cannot wear. For instance, in this high school, the students cannot wear camouflage because it's connected to an area gang. You can also see in the next article how some schools use uniforms as a way of combating a little bit of the influence of gangs into schools, because if students are wearing uniforms, they can't necessarily identify which gang they're affiliated with. And if you are in a school that does have a gang presence, you really need to coordinate with both your local police as well as community agencies and try to provide strong counseling and mentorship for these students. In fact, I found this video that I thought would be helpful, and it really focuses on the power of mentors in some of these urban schools.
There's a saying by a philosopher that goes, "If I have done or seen anything at all, I have done so standing on the shoulders of giants." And I have had some giants in my life. I've had mentors and advisors all along the way. People positioned in my life who supported me, who uplifted me. It was what they allowed me to believe was possible.
Buenos días. This is cool to keep in mind. You don't choose the times you live in, but you choose who you want to be, and you choose how you think.
I was raised, I like to say chaotically lucky, by my mom, who's a single mom, and she was very adamant, you're gonna get that education. And for someone who made below the poverty line, did not finish school herself. And I think she was that determined all more because she saw how hard and difficult it was without the education.
Thoughts, responses?
You can't control your circumstances always, but like you can.
I started to realize how lucky I had been. Statistically speaking, given my ethnicity and race, I was not supposed to make it out of this neighborhood. I wasn't even supposed to graduate high school. And here I am on this track to graduate, go to college, and do whatever I want. And it hit me. I need to take advantage of it. The individual expressing gratitude. Just by expressing it, happiness raises 10 times as much as if you didn't express it. I am what I call a first-generation college student, grad school student, and a first-generation teacher. And I teach high school at Summit Prep Charter High School.
Eyes closed. A deep breath in.
This year, now I'm teaching a new course called Habits, Community, and Culture, where we focus on supporting students in understanding, practicing, and developing their emotional intelligence skills through social emotional learning.
That is what intersectionality is about. It's about taking a lens of where people's identities crossing that are causing them to have compounded experiences of discrimination and oppression.
Most of my teaching day is supporting students in these kind of hands-on way. And that involves mindfulness practices, it involves helping ourselves get organized, things like relationship building. So my hope in all of that is that after a year in the class, students don't need me to help them figure out how to solve the problems in their community. I'm not a psychologist, I'm just a teacher who understands that this world is difficult sometimes.
Thank you for your conversations today. Be mindful of the announcements that we made around Wednesday and all that jazz. Good luck, I love you.
And so my primary defense is to tell a kid and mean it that I love you, I see you and all the years of pain that come with you, and I will hold space for you every single time. And I refuse to be a bystander in your life. I refuse to see you as a dot or a data point. I see you. The mentors I had along the way that said, it seems impossible now, but I'm gonna help you remove as many barriers as I can. And I'm gonna step away, and I'm gonna let you do the great work that I already see is what's inside you. I hope I can get out of my kids' way more. That's my hope.
I think you can agree with me that he's an amazing teacher and what an incredible mentor for his students. So we're still in this realm of school safety, and one of our last topics is going to be shootings. Now, there are two basic types of shootings you need to be considerate of when it comes to the schools, and that is targeted shootings and mass shootings. So targeted shootings is where the student or whomever the shooter is has a list or specific people in mind whom they intend to shoot. A mass shooting is more random, more non-discriminatory, where they are just going in and shooting as many or whomever they can. The mass shootings are more often going to occur in a predominantly white school, and the targeted shootings are the more common type, even though you don't hear about them as much in the news as the mass shootings. In case you'd like some data, here's some numbers. You can see the diagram on the left shows that the number of school shootings in the U.S. has decreased in 2019. We hope that this is a trend that will continue. Obviously, the next school year, the 2020 school year, is going to be unusual since there won't be as many face-to-face class meetings. The map on the right shows you where you tend to see these school shootings. And they are somewhat random because you can see they occur in both high population as well as more rural areas. When it comes to school shootings, this really requires the schools to have things like lockdowns. Whenever there is an emergency situation, they will lock the school down and they'll have a safety protocol for the students. Active shooter trainings. Some of these can be a little bit scary, where they do bring in a team of experts who will do a mock shooting scenario and help the school run through their procedures and make sure that they have proper protocols, as well as fire doors and things like that in place. Also, some schools will have either police on site all day or allow trained staff to conceal carry. Now, I'd like to point out, if they do have teachers or staff who are able to conceal carry, their training is much, much more advanced and difficult than the regular concealed carry course. And this is something that many Ohio schools have opted for. They have to go through a special kind of training. Their shooting has to be at the level of a state police officer, not just a concealed carry class. They go through at least 64 hours of shooting and training and decision making. They go through lots of different active shooting drills. It is a very challenging process to get approved to be able to carry in the schools. And then I think this might be my last topic under school safety, is looking at health and COVID. I don't have any notes you need to take on this one, because I think it's something that we're all very aware of, but I just wanted to point out, since this chapter is looking at how our social world impacts our schools, some of the ways this can impact schools. First of all, graduation. In the spring of 2020, high schools across the nation and the globe had to figure out, how do we do high school graduations? Also, when fall of 2020 came about, how do we socially distance in the classroom? And what about the provision of masks and face shields? I think this is a perfect example of how social context can impact our schools and classrooms. Here's a short video looking at COVID in relation to school openings.
It became very clear that for some of our students, particularly kids with learning differences or students that really need to be engaged with caring adults, that the virtual platform is challenging.
In our classroom, our curriculum is mostly functional life skills, communication skills, social skills, and these are all very challenging skills to teach at home with your parent.
That was the hard part, is sort of looking in the mirror and going, hey, this is not working. We cannot pretend everything's fine.
The staff right away was like, whoa, yes, let's do it. But then as it became reality, of course, there was concern about safety and health, and are we doing this in a way that's going to be continuing to build the trust that we have established with our students and families?
I did feel a little bit anxious, but also excited. I'm ready to be back in the world, and I think that the students and families felt pretty ready to be back in the world.
It was considered to be safe from a public health perspective if you followed a myriad of protocols, that you could bring together small cohorts of 12 students. The small cohort becomes its own bubble.
So if somebody got sick in one of those cohorts, then that cohort could stay home in quarantine, but the rest of the school could continue to operate.
When you walk up to campus, you're scanned for your temperature. You are also screened for your health. We immediately ask students to go to the restrooms, which are open, and wash their hands. As soon as they even walk into the classroom, there's masks available, there's hand sanitizer, soap and water, paper towels.
We spaced out the desks, and the first day we kind of made these borders around each desk, and we had each student kind of name their personal space.
It was awkward at first, I'm not gonna lie. It was a little bit weird. It's so hard when you're a school of hugs and high fives and playing games together to be social distanced. So we're doing a lot of learning by doing at the moment as teachers.
Just kind of learning as we go, when to clean, what to clean, how often to clean. That'll come with getting used to the classroom environment.
I'm glad we're coming back with this soft start. It helps us gain some ideas and foresight into what might be issues in the fall.
We're calling this a pilot and trying to make sure we learn from every single question.
It's definitely more challenging when you have to wear a mask all the time and wash your hands, but it's all worth it in the end because I just see how happy the parents are, how happy and engaged that the students are. You know, I just ask them, where'd you rather be, at home or here at school? At school.
I think you can see that all schools are struggling with similar problems to try to help bring students back in a safe way. Okay, so we have looked at physical and emotional safety. And now we're going to move on and take a brief look at mental health. And again, all these topics are looking at how the social world impacts how your students grow and develop. All right, mental health. 50% of mental health disorders are evident and appear before the age of 14, which means you might be seeing a variety of mental health disorders in the students in your classroom. Your school counselors need to be in tune with these students and working with social workers and parents to try to help these students. The diagram here at the bottom shows the median age of onset. So anxiety, you typically see around the age of 6. ADHD, sometimes not until the age of 11. I think sometimes we prematurely diagnose that in children when perhaps they're just a little hyper. And mood disorders, depression, bipolar, etc. can begin around the age of 13. In the realm of mental health, we do have to take a moment and take a look at a very serious and important topic, which is suicide. You may or may not know this, female teens are twice as likely to attempt suicide as males. But males are 4 times as likely to actually commit suicide and die at their own hands, whereas females are more likely to attempt it. Teachers need to look for signs of depression and signs of changes in behavior. And I have this huge graphic here showing you some of the things you might see in a student who is contemplating suicide and things you want to keep an eye out for. If you have suspicions, it's better to say something than to not. Notify counselors, call and talk to parents. Under the realm of mental health, another issue I want to take a brief look at is trauma-sensitive schools. Trauma-informed care is a big issue in the realm of education now. Trauma-sensitive schools are those who are really trying to create a safe space. A school and a space for students that is free of external threats and tries to really focus on teaching these students how to regulate their own emotions, how to engage in self-care, how to be resilient. It's something that if you feel like you have a calling for, you should really take a look for whenever you graduate. Their main thing is focusing on preventing discipline problems, not punishing them when they come up. And rather than focusing on punishing, looking at how can we de-escalate the problem? Why is the student acting out in this way? And how can we reach out to them and help them and support them? If you're interested in this idea of de-escalating behavior problems, this is a very important and essential skill to have in some schools. Here's a short video talking about how do you do that.
Students yelling or throwing chairs can be challenging, even frightening, but you can use a research-backed framework to de-escalate the situation. The first priority is to keep the student safe and help them calm down, not to elicit apologies or discuss consequences. A child in emotional turmoil is not prepared to be rational, and the research confirms that kids who have experienced trauma don't learn from punishment. Keep your instructions clear and concise and repeat as needed. Traumatized students have a hard time processing complex instructions. Avoid ultimatums like, stop, or I'll send you to the principal's office. Providing options like, you can get some water and we can talk in 5 minutes, or you can sit in the reading chair and I'll check in soon is a better strategy. Let your student know that some decisions are theirs. You can and should set boundaries and future expectations. Say, I can see that you're upset, but it's not okay to yell at me or throw things, for example. Recap what your student says throughout the conversation and check to see if you understood them correctly. That shows you're listening and confirms that you're both on the same page. Finally, remember the rest of your students. Acknowledge what happened, let them process it, and consider a mindfulness activity to help bring them back to calmness. For more on preventing and managing outbursts, visit edutopia.org.
Those are some pretty amazing and helpful tips when it comes to trying to de-escalate an outburst. All right, next on our list, we're going to be looking at sexuality and how sexuality might be impacting your students' development. Well, believe it or not, one of the things you're going to need to be aware of and prepared for is how to handle inappropriate sexual behaviors. This can occur at any age. I was once a manager of a daycare, and I had a young student who was approximately 4.5 years old who was caught in the bathroom trying to touch other students in the bathroom. And of course, we brought in parents and social workers, and we worked with the child on this. You never know at what age this might be an issue that you need to deal with. You need to respond immediately, not just to the child who is instigating the incident, but obviously those who are on the receiving end as well. Redirect the child, intervene with the appropriate authorities. Child sexualized behavior doesn't necessarily mean that that child has been a victim of abuse. Sometimes it's just the result of poor social skills, that they simply don't know how to interact with other kids. It can be impulse control, that they have a hard time controlling their own behaviors and they act without thinking. But if you do suspect abuse, you remember again, you are a mandatory reporter and would need to report that to child protective agencies. Substance abuse. You might already know this, but the most popular addictive drug among school-age students is both alcohol and cigarettes. And cigarettes, we also include in that category electronic vaporizers. What a lot of students don't realize, though, are the health risks that go along with vaping. It is advertised as a safer alternative, that if you switch from cigarettes to vaping, you've made a good choice. And what they don't know is it is actually a horrible choice. It is as bad, sometimes worse than cigarettes. It can be harmful to your immune system, which is especially a bad idea right now during the COVID virus. You are also inhaling not just nicotine, but formaldehyde. These e-cigarettes have been known to explode sometimes in people's face, causing disfiguring long-term damage. And you're inhaling just as much nicotine, perhaps more than if you were smoking cigarettes. And these are just a few of the health risks that go along with vaping. So I thought I'd ask a question. How many middle school students, not high school, but middle school, do you think are vaping? Now, my data is from 2018. What do you think? It is actually 1 in 20. That was higher than I thought. And obviously it's much higher. I think it's maybe 1 in 5 for high school students. It is extremely popular. The last one on our list in terms of how social context can in fact impact your students' development is health and fitness. So, one of the biggest areas is looking at trying to fight childhood obesity and trying to impact and in some way improve the nutrition that your students are receiving. One big thing that teachers can do is teach students how to read nutritional labels. You can also relate this to a math or to a science lesson by looking at percentages, by looking at fractions, by doing all kinds of things. So you can incorporate this into an actual lesson instead of just leaving this up to your health teacher. You want to teach about the importance of nutrition and exercise and what can occur when you get either poor nutrition or a lack of exercise. Be an advocate of PE courses and recess at your schools. Did you know that only 1 in 4 high schools actually require PE anymore? They should all be requiring PE, and you should perhaps be an advocate of that at your school, as well as encouraging students to engage in extracurricular activities. All right, so this will be where we pause, and we will pick up here for your next lesson, looking at social context and how it can impact learning.